established May 11, 1960.
I wish you all the very best on UPSLI's 60th anniversary celebration.
I cannot miss the opportunity to congratulate the school for 60 years of existence.
Ako si Assistant Professor Johann Frederick A. Cabab. Ang tawag nila sa akin, Sir Igor.
I have so many unforgettable memories or experiences with SLIS.
Hello, good day, and welcome to the first webinar episode of the 2020 UPSLIS webinar series entitled When Viruses and Misinformation Spread, Real and Fake News in the Time of COVID-19. This event is organized by the UP School of Library and Information Studies in celebration of its 59th founding anniversary. This is also our initial offering in a series of monthly webinars as we tread the road to our 60th anniversary next year in 2021. Thank you very much for tuning in. I am Elijah Darjuan, a faculty member of the school, and I will be your moderator for this webinar. To formally welcome us to this event, let's hear from our Dean, the Dean of the UP School of Library and Information Studies, Professor Mary Grace Golfo Barcelona.
Thank you, Sir Elijah. Good afternoon, and thanks to all who are watching from home here in the Philippines, and a pleasant day to all our viewers from all over the world. July 1st, 2020 is a day of celebration for the School of Library and Information Studies because this day is the 59th founding anniversary of SLIS. It is our school's birthday. Happy birthday, SLIS! Although the prevailing health crisis affecting the whole world dampens our spirit, as more and more succumb to COVID-19, and as we wait for the vaccine that would stop this pandemic, it nevertheless does not prevent us from celebrating this day. From being the oldest library school to being the first and only center of excellence in LIS education in the country, today we have all the reasons to celebrate and be grateful and proud of what SLIS has become in the past 59 years. Can you imagine? Since it became an autonomous unit of UP in 1961, SLIS has gone a long way. From its original name of Institute of Library Science, it has been renamed twice. First as Institute of Library and Information Science in 2002, and second as School of Library and Information Studies in 2005. These changes in name mirror the expanding domain of the library and information education. I will not give the usual walk down memory lane spiel today yet. I will reserve it for next year on our 60th anniversary. And hopefully, we are already face-to-face with you when we celebrate yet another SLIS milestone. Instead, I would like to give you a glimpse of what we have planned in the next coming months. So be ready. We start with today's webinar, which is the first in a series of webinars that we have lined up for you, as Elijah said earlier. Listed here are around 20 or more topics actually for our series of webinars, ranging from coping with the new normal in LIS teaching, to LIS teachers training on information literacy, records management and archival studies, indexing and abstracting, IFLA library reference model, consumer health information service in libraries, how to conduct qualitative and quantitative research, talk on freedom of information and data privacy, critical evaluation of social media information. And of course, we have Professor Johann Cabab's Happily Ever After talk on children's literature. There is also Ms. Rochelle Silverio's Kain Tayo, exploring Filipino culture and food representation in local children's books. We will also hold a special session for our students entitled Students Matter, Helping Our Students Thrive. On top of this long list of webinars, we also air regular archives podcasts. Our bi-weekly episodes For the Record, you probably have watched a few of them already, and two upcoming regular online discussion venues, one of which is the LIS Management Series, which will come out monthly, and the other, the Faculty Room. It is a discussion group where we will see SLIS faculty members chat on how we are coping under this new normal and everything else. So be ready for that. We will talk about anything under the sun from where we are. We are likewise preparing some videos of former deans, former college secretaries of SLIS, and we are also working on oral histories of SLIS from members of the SLIS community itself, and we are gearing for the launch of the SLIS Coffee Table book. All these activities and more are what everyone can expect in the next coming months. So do watch out for this and subscribe to the SLIS YouTube channel and other media accounts, social media accounts. Since today's celebration signals the year-long journey to our 60th founding anniversary, it is aptly dubbed SLIS on the Road to 60, Challenging Traditions, Embracing Innovations. We begin our first steps with a webinar on when viruses and misinformation spread, real and fake news in the time of COVID-19. To be given by one reliable and respectable source, of course, Professor Edson Tandoc Jr. Once again, we want to assert the importance of critical evaluation of information that we read, hear, and share, especially via social media, and to remind each and every one of us of the value of accurate and reliable information during these challenging times. All right, I will no longer keep you waiting. Ilan na ba ang views natin ngayon? Again, thank you very much for joining us today as we celebrate our 59th founding anniversary, and welcome to SLIS Road to 60th celebration.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dean Grace. We're so excited to see the future webinars, podcasts, and other projects UPSLIS will be offering in the next few months. As Dean Mary Grace has mentioned earlier, in spite of the current health crisis, we at SLIS are definitely thrilled to organize these webinars and reach a global audience. Traditionally, we organize face-to-face lectures to engage audiences regarding trending topics and relevant issues on LIS, but the new normal compelled us to hold these lectures in the virtual world. We welcome all viewers of this webinar, from practicing librarians, information professionals, teachers and students of LIS, and all those interested in information studies from around the world. We can be seen online on our UPSLIS Facebook page at facebook.com/UPSLIS. I know you are all excited to hear from our young and very accomplished speaker. But first, here are the mechanics for our webinar. For your questions, if you have any questions during the lecture, you can go to menti.com and type the code 834985. You can go to menti.com and type the code 834985. Click Ask a Question, and you will be then have a space to type in your question. It will be posted anonymously, so we highly appreciate if you include your name and affiliation in your question. You can also view at menti.com previously posted questions, so kindly check them to avoid redundancies. We will not be entertaining questions from Facebook comments on this video. For your questions, please go to menti.com and type the code 834985. We will be going through your questions after the lecture. Now, for the certificates, we will be issuing certificates of participation to those who will be attending this webinar. We ask that you finish the event and watch out for the announcement containing the link to where you can register for your certificates. For registered professionals, this webinar may be applied for continuing professional development, or CPD, as a self-directed learning activity. Please stay with us until the end of the event so that you can have the link to register for your certificates. If you find this afternoon's topic interesting, we also invite you to like and share this Facebook video so that the world will know more about it. Just click share on the lower right side of your screen. Please also like our Facebook page, UPSLIS, where this video is currently being streamed. That's UPSLIS on Facebook. You may also find UPSLIS on Twitter and on YouTube, where the recording of this webinar will be posted soon. For those who just tuned in, we welcome you to the first webinar episode of the 2020 UP-SLIS Webinar Series entitled When Viruses and Misinformation Spread, Real and Fake News in the Time of COVID-19. This is organized in celebration of the 59th anniversary of UP-SLIS and the first in a series towards our 60th anniversary. Now, to introduce our notable speaker, let's have one of our faculty members at the School of Library and Information Studies, Dr. Ira Benrostro-Cabal.
Thanks, Sir Eli. I'm very happy to welcome and introduce our guest speaker for our first webinar for the anniversary celebration of UP-SLIS. Our speaker for today was supposed to join us in the Gabriel A. Bernardo Memorial Lecture Series last March 13, around the same time when the country was put under strict lockdown. You know, COVID happened, and we were sad to cancel everything after months of planning and coordinating, but we remained hopeful that soon we could bring people again together in one platform with our speaker to discuss about a very timely issue on misinformation, especially during these difficult times. So COVID is still here, and we're together virtually. Our speaker is a journalist who used to work for the Philippine Daily Inquirer before he joined the academe as a part-time lecturer at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He is now an associate professor at Wickham School of Communication and Information, Nanyang Technological University in Singapore. His main research focuses on the intersection of journalism and new technology. He serves as associate editor of top-tier journals such as Digital Journalism and Asian Journal of Communication. He is also the current director of the PhD and Master's Research Program of the Wickham School of Communication and Information at NTU. He was a Fulbright Scholar and obtained his PhD in journalism in 2013 from the University of Missouri and his Master of Mass Communication from Nanyang Technological University in 2008 as the top MMC graduate. He is a proud scholar ng bayan. He finished BA Journalism from the University of the Philippines, Diliman in 2003 as the first summa cum laude, bongga. So he really made history, first summa cum laude in the history of NASCOM under the Department of Journalism. Today, we are very honored to have a renowned scholar and professor of journalism who is also a fellow ISCO, a Wickham kid from NTU, a well-admired mentor and colleague in the academic and journalism world, and a very dear friend of mine, an inspiring friend and idol to many people. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Edson Tandoc Jr.
Thank you so much, Ira, and thank you very much to UP-SLIS for this opportunity to share about the research that we do here at the Wickham School of Information, Communication and Information at NTU in Singapore. Magandang hapon po sa inyong lahat. I'm very happy that you can join us in today's webinar, and happy 59th anniversary to UP-SLIS. So I'll be sharing some of the research that we've been doing here at the Wickham School of Communication and Information. We've been tracking and conducting different studies on different issues about COVID-19. And some of the research that we will be sharing, I will be sharing with you this afternoon, comes from this particular project we call the InCube. Let me just figure out how to make sure that you're seeing what I'm seeing on my screen now. There we go. So I would like to call your attention to this particular website that we just launched last month. It's called InCube. It's Information Integrity Initiative, and it's a website that brings together the different projects that we are conducting in the school. It's funded by the Social Science Research Council of Singapore, the Ministry of Education in Singapore, and WhatsApp Research Awards. So you can check out the status of the projects by looking at our website. So what we're tracking, some of the things that we're tracking, we're looking at news consumption patterns, where people are getting information about COVID-19. We're also looking at not just active information seeking, but also information avoidance. And we're also looking at the spread of misinformation. And so I'll start by talking about one of the first projects that we conducted sometime in February this year. we were looking at how young people, in particular our university students, how are they navigating uncertainty brought about by the pandemic. Health crises such as COVID-19 are usually surrounded by high levels of uncertainty. We don't know what's going on, what's the origin of the virus, how can we protect ourselves, and uncertainty is cognitively uncomfortable. So humans don't like uncertainty, and so the dominant belief is we then try to employ some strategies on how we can deal with uncertainty or reduce uncertainty. But others have talked about how some people might also try to navigate uncertainty in a different way. So the dominant thinking is that people rely on information seeking to reduce their uncertainty. But then others are also saying that for some people, seeking information might also expose them to potentially anxiety inducing information. And so some of them might just avoid information. So we were interested in how our university students in particular are navigating uncertainty during that time. So again, this was conducted in February this year, arguably the early stages of the outbreak in Singapore. When we did the focus groups, we only had, I think, around 70 cases that time. Now Singapore has more than 40,000 cases. So we are still conducting interviews with different demographics. And so the research is ongoing. But for this particular study, we talked to 89 participants. We conducted focus group discussions, about 8 of them, and you can see the demographic distribution on the screen. And so very briefly, we looked at how they how they manage uncertainty through information behavior. And so we found that some of them engage in information seeking, but in contrast to the dominant idea of active information seeking, where you go to specific information sources, such as mainstream news sites, to actively pull information, most of those who seek information within our groups actually use a less active strategy to seek information, what we call a form of news platforms pushing information to users. So this is done through subscription to news apps or messaging apps. For example, Telegram, which is the messaging app that's popular among young people in Singapore. The Straits Times, which is the dominant mainstream newspaper in the country, they actually started a Telegram service to push news updates to subscribers. And some of our participants subscribe to these news alert services. The Singapore government also created a WhatsApp service where subscribers can subscribe to the alerts from the Singapore government. But for our participants, the more dominant strategy to navigate uncertainty via information behavior is through what we call information scanning, which is encountering information in the course of general information seeking or during general social media use. So they do not seek out COVID-19 information specifically, but when they come across it in their general news consumption behavior, they still attend to these pieces of information. So they still get informed without actively seeking it. And so what we think we're seeing from these focus group discussions is the importance of information scanning for a demographic that's already found by previous studies to be not a big fan of routine news consumption. And as a former journalist in the Philippines, I worked for the Philippine Daily Inquirer for 6 years. Many years ago, my interest is in journalism studies. And so I'm also interested in monitoring where people get their news from. What you're seeing on your screen now next to me is results of a survey that I did in December 2019 with 1,000 Singapore residents. Since when I joined NTU in 2014, I've been doing national surveys every year to track news consumption patterns. And in 2014, I still remember that the most commonly used news source was a print copy of a newspaper. So the Straits Times is the dominant newspaper in Singapore, and it has, at least in the earlier years when I was here, enjoyed a pretty stable subscription base. But when I did the same survey in 2015, Facebook became the most used news source, and it's been like that since then. And when I did the survey last year, it's still the same pattern. Reading news on Facebook is the most commonly used method of obtaining news. But for me, what's interesting, what's surprising is when I included WhatsApp, which is a messaging service, the most popular messaging service in the world, and also in Singapore. When I included that in the 2018 survey, last year was the first year that it actually outperformed local TV and local news websites. So I think what we're seeing here is the rise of not only social media platforms, but also of closed messaging apps such as WhatsApp, or what is used in the Philippines, Viber, or Line in Thailand and Taiwan, and other types of messaging apps. I think increasingly they're playing important roles in how people come across news on a daily basis. And so we were interested when my colleagues and I also started to do studies within the context of COVID-19. We were also interested in news consumption patterns with regards to the COVID-19 outbreak. And so we also asked a similar question when we did a survey in early February this year, again, 1,000 Singapore residents. And this is interesting because we found that when we asked people about actively seeking information specific to COVID-19, it's actually the local TV news that's the most commonly used news source, and also local news websites, while WhatsApp and Facebook are ranked third and fourth. And so I think when this is also quite consistent with studies that were conducted in other media markets, such as the UK or the US, where traditional news platforms saw an increase in their viewership during the early stages of the outbreak. But then we also track, the same set of people across time. So we did a 3-wave survey, the first survey in February, the second survey in March, and the third survey in late April to early May. And we tracked around 500, the same set of 500 people. And we looked at how they also sought information about COVID-19. And studies surveys that were done in other countries, particularly in the UK, noted that the initial surge of news consumption was followed by an increase in news avoidance, which is something that we can expect when people start feeling fatigue, and also start feeling overwhelmed by the information that they see about a particular issue. But in the surveys that we did, we saw that news consumption on news websites, on local TV, on WhatsApp, and on Facebook actually increased over time. And again, the last survey was conducted in late April and early May. So it would be interesting to see what's the current situation is. But again, what we're seeing is the increasing importance of Facebook and WhatsApp in the news consumption habits of Singapore residents. Now I want to focus on WhatsApp, which is for me a really fascinating platform when it comes to different aspects of information behavior. This graph that you're seeing now on the screen is from the Digital News Report published by the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism. They're doing surveys across a range of media markets. In Singapore, since 2018, they've noted a quite stable use of WhatsApp overall. It's around 86% of the population using WhatsApp. When it comes to using WhatsApp specifically for news, we see an increase from 41% in 2019 to 47% in 2020. This survey in 2020 was conducted in January, late January. And so in my own survey, I also asked, specifically about WhatsApp. I mean, this is just another way of representing an earlier graph that you saw. Basically, again, noting a pattern of increasing reliance on WhatsApp for information about COVID-19. And again, as I mentioned earlier, I think this is something that even the Singapore government has recognized. So the Singapore government has tapped into WhatsApp as a platform to communicate with residents. They created a WhatsApp alert service. Every day we get about between 2 and 3 messages, usually updating us about the new cases, number of new cases, and also announcing new regulations, say, for example, on travel or to regulate mass gatherings. So those who subscribe to these services would get notifications on their phones. And I think the good thing with this, at least for those people who might be worried about potentially anxiety-inducing information, is you can control or regulate when you attend to these pieces of information. So by subscribing to alerts, right, and you see a notification, but you have the choice, you have the control whether you want to see it right away or you want to wait for a while before you attend to that information. However, WhatsApp has also become a platform where misinformation about COVID-19 and about other issues spread. These are just some of the examples that we saw when we were monitoring messages that are being exchanged on that platform. So in the beginning, in the earlier stages of the outbreak in Singapore, we were seeing messages on external events that might affect Singapore. For example, what's going on in other countries, what's the count in terms of cases in other countries, and how that might affect Singapore. And then we also saw messages listing places to avoid, for example. And then over time, that also changed. Some of the messages started focusing on symptoms. How do you self-diagnose, for example? And then other messages also started talking about cures. Many of them actually were not scientifically proven. And so we think this is a potential problem. That's actually not a potential. It is a problem because we've seen enough cases to show that the spread of misinformation is dangerous. And that's also true in the context of COVID-19. You've probably heard of this case in South Korea where a church sprayed salt water into the mouths of their churchgoers, thinking that, consistent with some viral messages, that this would help kill the virus, and instead they infected 46 churchgoers. We've also heard of US President Donald Trump talking during a televised briefing about the possibility of injecting disinfectants into people. Later, he clarified he was being sarcastic, but that did not stop some Americans from ingesting bleach. So, fake news and other forms of misinformation having real negative but then dangerous effects. And so another project that we've done is to monitor information being exchanged on this platform. So to do that, we joined a WhatsApp group that was actually created by a group of undergraduate students from our school here at NTU. They created this WhatsApp group as a platform to do fact checking. So if you're a member of that group, you can send messages and verify, if you're in doubt, and the group will verify for you. At least the administrators will verify for you. But we've also done a survey of the members of the group, and I think the purpose of that WhatsApp group has changed over time. Now, I think it becomes less of a fact-checking service, but more of a sense-making platform for the members, where they exchange information about COVID-19, about the outbreak, not really to seek verification, but basically to express themselves and maybe support each other. So when we joined that group, we collected the messages that we were forwarded, a total of 169 since we joined in February up to late May, when we stopped data collection. And since we know that users turn to WhatsApp for COVID-19 information, it is also important to see what they're actually seeing when they are on that platform. So we were interested in the veracity of the information that are being exchanged on this platform. And so with the help of one of my students, we did our own fact checking of the messages that we collected. So in this study, we were only interested in messages that were forwarded. So these are the messages that contained WhatsApp's forwarded tag. So I think 2 years ago, if I'm right, WhatsApp introduced the forwarded tag, where if I'm a sender and I'm forwarding a message that I just got from someone else that was just forwarded to me, so it's not my original message, the receiver would see the message accompanied by a single arrow or a double arrow, depending on how many times the message has been forwarded, to alert the receiver that this is not my original message. And so we focus on studying messages that contain the forwarded tag. So we found that in general, of the sample that we analyzed, 34.3% of the messages were based on inaccurate details. 27.2% were based on accurate details. 23.1% of the messages mixed both accurate and inaccurate details, while the rest of the messages were difficult to independently verify. We were interested in whether the distribution of accurate and inaccurate information also varied over time. So we also divided the messages in 2 stages. The first stage was in late January, started in late January when Singapore reported its first case, until February 7, when the second stage that we identified here, when the Singapore government raised its alert to the second highest level, called Dorscon Orange. And then the third period is when Singapore announced the circuit breaker measures in early April. And basically that's when we were all asked to stay at home. When we were in actually a lockdown. And what we can see here is in the early stage, there were basically majority of the messages were factual. And based on the examples that I can remember, these are messages just basically alerting other users of places that have recorded positive cases, telling people factual information, mostly based on news reports. Then when we entered Dorscon Orange, that's when we saw more fake messages than real messages. And this was, a lot of these messages were about prevention measures, so how you can cure COVID-19, which again were based on details and practices that have not been scientifically validated. And then when we entered the circuit breaker phase, we saw more mixed messages, messages that combine both real and correct and wrong details. So we saw examples of one incident which is a real incident that happened, being mixed with details that are not true. And this actually is potentially dangerous because for some people, they might judge the message based on the real details and not on the incorrect details. And I think it's particularly important because, again, in this earlier 3-wave survey that I discussed, in the third wave, we also measured exposure to fake news and whether they believe in the fake news pieces that they were exposed to. So in that survey, we showed our participants several headlines that have been subsequently debunked by mainstream media and the government. For example, there was a viral message that claimed some robbers were barging into people's homes, pretending to be distributing masks, but this has been debunked, and there was actually no police report made to indicate that this was a real case. Another example, there was a viral message that claimed the authorities were going into people's homes to actually check whether safe distancing measures are being implemented inside the house, and the government has also debunked that. So in the survey, we asked people how often they've come across each of these information. And then after that, we also ask them whether they think this is definitely true or definitely false. So what I'm showing you now is the percentage of those who did not say no. Basically, so when we talked about belief, it's we asked them to indicate on a 5-point scale from definitely false to definitely true. So what you're seeing are the percentage of respondents who did not choose definitely false, right? So they might not believe it 100%, but they have some belief, in this information. In terms of exposure, what you're seeing are the percentage of people who did not choose the option of never, right? So if you've seen it once, we still count in this graph, we still count this as you being exposed. So exposure to fake news items range from 52.2% of the sample saying they've seen this particular fake news item to high of 84% of the sample saying, yes, they've come across this fake news item. When it comes to belief, we see that also ranged from around 40% up to 80%. And so we what we're seeing here is that there is a significant reach for fake news items in Singapore, at least for these specific items that we included in the survey, and that to some extent, being exposed can lead to believing in these fake news items. And so for me, an important question, which I've been, and my colleagues, which we've been trying to answer in a series of projects, is why do some people fall for fake news? So the example you're seeing on the screen is not an example that I got from Singapore. It is an example that I got from the Philippines. It's an example of a forwarded message that I got from our family group chat. So this was forwarded to a family member by a family physician, right? So, and looking at, so if you can see it, it might be too small, but basically it's a recommendation of medicines that you can take. These are medicines that are supposedly taken in isolation hospitals. There's also, in a way, a recommendation of kinds of food that you can eat or juices that you can drink that's high in alkaline levels. So that will help you to fight the virus. And I also asked my younger brother, who is in the medical school, to then also look at this item. And there are telltale signs that some of these information are inaccurate. But why do people fall for fake news? Why would some people think this message might be true, right? So some factors that we've looked at first is the credible proximate source. So on social media, the idea of source is quite complex, right? I can't send or forward or post a message from ABS-CBN News, right? But for the people seeing my post, who is the source? It could be ABS-CBN, the original producer of the message, but it could also be me, right, which is the immediate sender. And so some studies have distinguished between what they call a distal source, in this case ABS-CBN News, and a proximate source, in this case me. And how we evaluate the credibility of the message we're seeing might depend on how credible we think the proximate source is more than the distal source, right? So a low credibility distal source, when amplified by a high credibility proximate source, might result in a message, maybe even questionable message, to be more persuasive and also more credible. So in this case, if I receive a similar message, from a person I trust, maybe the doctor who's been taking care of my family members, then I will attach more credibility to this message. A second and also related factor is how ubiquitous a message is. If we see a message often, we are more likely to believe that this is true, and it's something that producers of misinformation and disinformation take advantage of. What they do is basically using an army of bots or trolls. They would amplify a particular message by promoting it or uploading it in multiple questionable sites. And so if I encounter one version of that message and I Google it, I will still find similar messages from different sources, right? And that becomes a heuristic for people to think, oh, everyone is reporting about this, so this might be true. And then there's also plausibility. If something is plausible, it might be true, right? In this case, if you look at the list of medicines being recommended, vitamin C, vitamin E, this is very plausible. I mean, I've seen this in hospitals, and I also drink vitamin C, so this might be plausible. And related to that is wanting something to be true. In a particular context where we are dealing with a lot of uncertainty, with a virus that is difficult to control, we want to increase our perception of our personal control, right? And seeing messages like this that can help us supposedly protect ourselves, and especially recommending things that are easy to do. We want it to be true, right? And by wanting it to be true, we are attaching credibility to this message. And some people actually share questionable information or viral messages, not as a form of endorsement, not necessarily because they believe it's true, but with some focus groups that we've done here in Singapore, and I'm sure it's also true for some people in the Philippines, when they share information, it's because they're not sure. And by sharing, they're waiting for someone else to debunk or to confirm, right? What should happen is someone should stand up and debunk or confirm. But then for some message receivers or others who see this message, who regard this person as an opinion leader, right, someone that they look up to, then they're probably less likely to debunk or confirm and would probably just believe the message as true. And finally, again, I'm really interested in how people seek information and counter news, and so I think news consumption patterns and how these patterns have been changing are also important factors in making people more vulnerable to fake news and other types of misinformation and disinformation. So it's not just about where you're getting news. So studies have found, for example, that people who rely almost exclusively on social media for their news consumption are more likely to believe in fake news items. But it's also about not getting news at all, right? And for example, there's a phenomenon of people avoiding news called news avoidance. And based on studies that that I've reviewed and that will also conducted, and I'll share with you in a moment, even avoiding news can also make people vulnerable to fake news. So in the same three-wave survey that we completed, we also looked at news avoidance. So one statement that we use to measure news avoidance is what you're seeing on your screen. I avoided reading about COVID-19 on social media like Facebook and Instagram. And you see that across time, right? This has increased from February to March to April. There's a steady increase in the percentage of our participants. Again, these are the same set of people. So there's an increase in the number of people who agreed that they've avoided reading about COVID-19 even on social media. And so one manuscript that we prepared from this data looked at the impact of news avoidance on subjective knowledge and belief in misinformation. So using the first two waves of the survey, we found that those who felt they were overloaded with information about COVID-19, they also reported feeling having difficulties processing information about COVID-19. They've also reported feeling tired of seeing these information. And these three factors, information overload, analysis paralysis, and news fatigue, all contributed to participants avoiding the news. And we were interested whether avoiding the news would be related to how much people think they know about this issue. And we found that there is a negative relationship. Those who avoid the news, they also reported lower levels of perceived subjective knowledge, which is good. At least these people, they know that they're not as informed as others who follow the news consistently. But for me, a source of concern here is these people who avoid the news are also more likely to believe in the misinformation items that I showed earlier. And so what we're seeing here is not just about where you get your news from. Even if you avoid the news completely, which some people are doing for a number of factors that might also make them vulnerable to believing in misinformation. And so what I've learned so far from all these studies, and again, some of these are ongoing, and so any feedback that you can share with us would be very, very helpful. I'll be very grateful to hear them. But three things. First is the importance of access and exposure to real news. Even the idea of a passive information behavior, such as information scanning with regards to COVID-19, can be helpful to keep people informed in a situation, in a context where specific measures need to be taken. People have to be informed. People should have access to real news. Seeing the dangers associated with avoiding the news or believing in fake news and misinformation, I think there should be more access instead of less access to credible, real news. I think information scanning is also a good balance between active information seeking and just avoiding the news. I understand for some people they feel like they have to protect themselves from anxiety or more uncertainty by avoiding potentially negative information, but it's still important to be informed. And so information scanning might be a good compromise, a good way to manage uncertainty. And also, lastly, I think it's very important to debunk fake news when we see it. There are, in studies that we've done earlier, there are a number of factors why people who are able to detect that they've come across something that's not true are not very willing to correct that if they don't want to hurt people's feelings, or they think it's not relevant to them, or they think it's not going to make any difference. But it might make a difference, right? And then people we've interviewed here in the focus groups we've conducted, there is some effect when people are told that what they shared earlier was wrong. They try to be more careful. Some of them try to become more careful the next time. And so I think it's important to call people's attention politely when they share something that could be wrong. So to conclude, this is one quote that we wrote for commentary that we shared with the Channel News Asia. There we said that online falsehoods work like viruses. They infect one vulnerable host who can then spread them to other hosts. One user wrongly believing in a falsehood and then sharing it with others instead of taking steps to verify the information first, it's all it takes to start the spread of misinformation. So just like COVID-19, addressing the issue of misinformation about it is also a collective effort. So I will end with that, and I will thank you for your attention this afternoon. Again, the findings that I've shared with you are all under the Information Integrity Initiative project. If you want to learn more, please look at our website, and you can also reach out to me if you have questions or feedback for your research, for our research rather. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Edson, for giving us an informative and very insightful discussion on relevant studies on information exchange that's happening online. Now, as we transition, may I reiterate that for those who just tuned in, this is the 2020 UP SLIS webinar series, the first in a series of webinars offered by the UP School of Library and Information Studies in celebration of its 59th anniversary. If you have any questions, just go to menti.com and type the code 834985. Please check the previously posted questions to avoid duplication. Now, let's move on to see the questions posted by our viewers. Professor Edson, are you ready for the questions that are that have been posted earlier?
Yeah, sure. As long as I can answer.
Hopefully. Yes, we have a few questions here. Let's have our first question. One of our viewers posted, what can we do when it is our parents, older relatives, or older workmates that are the ones who are spreading misinformation on Facebook?
I think it's important to engage with them. There is always a temptation of just ignoring or not saying anything, which is the easier thing to do. But I think we need to remember that for a lot of instances, when our family members share something to us, it comes from a place of care, right? They want you to know this information because they think it's true and this might be potentially useful for you. And so I think we should engage. We should say politely that this is not accurate, and engage them and openly talk to them rather than disengaging. I would say that for me, that's what I've been trying to do also with my own family and my own group of friends.
Yes, I know this is a very large or a very societal concern. And I know that for every individual, each person can do his own effort in mitigating the spread of fake news online. Thank you. Now, for our next question, beyond our social circle, beyond our friends, our relatives, this question is being asked by one of our viewers. What can we do when the people who are leading us in the government are the ones who are promoting misinformation?
That's a good question. Also, I guess challenging to answer. But I will try. I think what we're seeing now, that especially when the many parts of the country were put into lockdown, is that people who would otherwise ignore hateful speech or misinformation, they actually had time now to engage. And so if you look at the activity on social media around these courses, we can see that people are engaging, and I think that's important. And we should also do that even when the questionable information comes from the top. I think it's really important to engage.
Yes, it's very relevant that the people also, given that if you're in a democratic society, then people who actually has the power to control information that is floating around. Yes, I definitely agree with that. Now, for our third question, one of our viewers posted, Facebook usage in the Philippines is high, and there are some studies that have mentioned that systemic misinformation campaigns, for example, through bots and paid trolls, is happening through FB. I've seen a lot of studies related to that. How can we fight this?
Yeah, it's not an easy thing to do. It's something, and a lot of the research that we do is actually trying to problematize this particular question. My particular interest in messaging apps is that these messaging apps tend to be closed ecosystems, right? So when misinformation spreads, it's usually between the people involved in that particular communication context. So it's more difficult for a third party entity to monitor. But on Facebook, there is a chance, for other people not part of the immediate conversation to observe that there is questionable information being exchanged. And I think it's important to engage, as I've said earlier. If you see something that's not true, regardless of whether it's from your family or it's from a government official, I think you should politely engage. Another thing that I forgot to mention earlier is for some people, we think that if we reason out, if we appeal to people's, if we provide evidence, right? If we appeal to people's reason, then they will be convinced. But that's what we've been finding in the studies that we've been reading and we're conducting, is that for some people, belief in misinformation is not really about evidence, right? It's not really about reason. So you cannot appeal to them using evidence. And so we need to think of better ways to engage with some of these people. But going back to the question, I think second thing that we need to do aside from engaging is also to demand that these social media platforms and tech companies really do something about this. I think they are finally trying to institute measures, and I think part of that is because there's been pressure from users themselves and from the public. I think we should continue, demanding that they should take on the responsibility of making sure that these spaces don't become breeding grounds for not only misinformation but hate speech. So I think that's the second thing. And the third thing is really, if you think about it, at the end of the day, fake news and other forms of disinformation and misinformation wouldn't be a big problem if no one believes in them, right? And I think they're very potent because some people still fall, vulnerable to these questionable information. And so I think the larger and people have said this before, the more macro intervention would be to really improve people's social media literacy and make sure that they're not only immune to fake news, but they also become proactive in calling out the attention of the appropriate people and authorities when they see something questionable.
That's very nice. I do believe that I would be agreeing with you that to sum it all up, I got four basic points from your answer. We should engage people, and we should demand platforms to clean their act up, platforms, social media platforms, legitimizing accurate sources of information, and also teaching people how to detect false or misinformation online. Now, before we proceed to the next question, let me just greet our viewers. Thank you very much for joining us on our webinar series. We have viewers from Bulacan, Pampanga, from Austin, Texas, and as far away as Dubai in the Middle East. Thank you very much for joining us. Again, if you have any questions, just post it on menti.com and type the code 834985. Now, we still have a few questions here. For our next question, what is the worst fake news you have encountered so far? And how exactly, Professor Edson, did you react with it upon seeing it? What's the worst fake news you have encountered?
It's really interesting. I've never thought of that actually. Okay, I think that what maybe it's the fake news item that started my research work in this area. I don't recall when it happened, but one of my former high school teachers posted on his Facebook feed a news article that says Pope Francis is the devil, right? And it's like a news format.
Okay.
And before that, I've noticed that he has been posting, questionable information. But when I saw that, it just didn't fit his character. He's been trying to present himself on social media as someone who's very religious, right? And so I got surprised, and then I got worried, because he was my one of my teachers, and a lot of us respect him a lot, and so he is an authority. He is an opinion leader for a lot of people, and if just one or two people believe in the post that he shares, that can be potentially that's worrisome. And so I reported the post. I also politely messaged him on social media, on Facebook, to ask him why he posted what he did. And he said because he wasn't sure. And I was like, but there are ways to find out. And that, for me, that's a specific item that you don't even need to verify, right? I feel like, for someone who's taught me some of my basic math skills, this is something that he should not have believed outright. And so after worrying, I also got interested in understanding the thinking or the cognitive process behind this behavior. Since then, he has stopped sharing questionable items on his Facebook account, but he started sending me private messages on Messenger, also a number of other fake news items, and also that made me become worried again, because if he's doing that to me, he might also be doing it to other people, and other people might believe. And yeah, so I guess it's not probably the worst example that I've encountered, but it's one example that triggered my interest in this particular phenomenon.
Okay. At this point, thank you very much, Professor Edson, for answering our viewers' questions. Can you show again the last slide that you showed us earlier, so that if our viewers have any further questions on your research, or if they are interested to know more about what you're doing at NTU, they can reach you?
Yeah, sure. So they can reach me via Twitter or via email. And also, as if they're interested in the research that we do, I would also direct you to our website, blogs.ntu.edu.sg/in. It's our Information Integrity Initiative, or what we call InCube, where we post some updates about the research that we're doing, and also a description of the general research areas that we're working in.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor Edson. At this point, we will now award the Certificate of Appreciation to our speaker. The certificate reads, UP-SLIS presents the Certificate of Appreciation to Dr. Edson Tandoc Jr. for delivering his valuable webinar on critical information literacy entitled When Viruses and Misinformation Spread, Real and Fake News in the Time of COVID-19, as part of the 2020 UP-SLIS Lecture Series in celebration of its 59th anniversary, given this first day of July 2020, UP Diliman, Quezon City. Signed, Rhea Rowena U. Apolinario, our College Secretary, and Professor Mary Grace P. Golfo Barcelona, our Dean. Maraming salamat po. Thank you very much, Dr. Edson.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Napaka-high-tech ng UP-SLIS.
Oh, diba? Nakarating po agad sa kanya. To our viewers, I do hope that you had a takeaway from the talk earlier. May this lead the way towards renewed perspectives in the way that we look into the pandemic and misinformation online. Watch out for the second webinar on our series entitled Responding to Challenges, Transforming LIS Pedagogy, with our Dean Mary Grace and yours truly as speakers. That's gonna be on August 5, Wednesday at 2:00 p.m. webcasting here at the Facebook page of UP-SLIS. For updates on future lectures, talks, and other events, you can go to our website, upslis.info, and engage with us on social media, like our Facebook page, follow us on Twitter, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, all of which are UP-SLIS, on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. Our sincerest thanks to our very supportive UP-SLIS faculty and staff for helping us organize this event. To you, our viewers, thank you very much for joining us on our first webinar on the road to the 60th of the UP School of Library and Information Studies. For those who are interested to have certificates for this webinar, please stay with us until the end of this event and watch out for the link to register for your certificate. This is Elijah Darjuan, your moderator, wishing you all the best and see you on the next webinar. Bye.